So let's talk about one other thing which didn't come up in your questions that you sent, right? But
Hmm.
it's sort of emerging more naturally, which is this profound feeling that you have, right? That came over you.
Hmm.
And I guessed the wrong thing, but I said helplessness. And you said, no, it's just watching her destroy herself, right? But my hunch, Jim, is it's probably a little of both. It's not one or the other. And the reason I'm saying that is because I could get the feel from you, like just listening to you today, that there probably is a sense of helplessness, which would be completely understandable for a few reasons. One of which is you mentioned that you give advice or suggestions and they go unheard. So that's
Hmm.
hard. This is in my field what we call psychic helplessness. It's like you trying to change somebody, right? And it doesn't put a dent in their behavior. But also there's something else in my field that I think would be helpful for you to understand or for all anybody listening. It's a complicated concept. Most people heard of the concept called projection. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, Jim.
Hmm.
Projection, it's like when you put your stuff onto somebody else. But
Yeah.
there's another concept called projective identification, and that's like even a more early level. We call it primitive, but I don't mean to pathologize it, but it's an earlier level of, believe it or not, communication. So, in other words, you may have your own helplessness in you, Jim, because of your history with your parents or your
Hmm.
upbringing. But if your daughter has some of these traits, we're not diagnosing her of vulnerable narcissism, right?
Hmm.
We know there's a feeling of helplessness inside of her as well, that she can't manage her life. Whether she talks about it or not, it's
Hmm.
irrelevant. We know it's probably there, right? But one way to communicate that is through this thing we call projective identification, which is to put it in somebody else. So that's why I wanted to go back to it because you can actually use your feeling, Jim. Like don't
Hmm.
discard it or just walk away saying what's wrong with me or this is weak that I'm crying. You can also look at it as a form of communication that your daughter's trying to show you in a very powerful way. Not pleasant, right? It's
Hmm.
not pleasant
But
to have this
powerful.
put on to you, right? But she's trying to show you what it feels like to be her, if that makes sense. I don't know if that resonates at all or if that's clear.
Um, it's it's clear what you're saying. I
Mm,
don't see it as clear as her actions. I would have to really think about that in some depth and
yeah.
see what happens when I interact with her
Well,
again.
just think of any
Think that
interaction where
avenue.
you just think of any interaction where you give her a suggestion and you see nothing changes, right? And
Hmm.
she continues to suffer. Okay, you mentioned the boyfriend. There it is. There's an example. So it sounds to me like the boyfriend drives you crazy, right? But there's
Hmm.
nothing you could do about it, you see? So, in other words, you have
I
your
know.
own feeling of helplessness there. But all I'm asking you to consider, and this will help sort of cool you down a little bit, is that it may not just be your feelings. She may be feeling helpless to get out of the relationship herself. She can't do it.
Oh, well, I believe that, and I think, like personally, I think the therapy she needs is addiction therapy, not because she's doing drugs.
Mm-hmm.
He's the drug, and she's the addict. That's how I believe their relationship is. I believe she doesn't know how to get out of it, and she
Yes.
knows it's not good for her.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's
that's
right.
how my approach is that she's an addict,
Yeah,
but
and
it's
if it's
not
truly
drugs.
an abusive, if it's truly like an abusive relationship or one that she's not happy, right? Maybe it has volatility, ups and downs.
Hmm.
There's I don't know if you've listened to these episodes. I've done a few episodes on something called the trauma bond, but
Hmm.
basically that's when two people come together and there's this really intense relationship that unfortunately on the surface to you and me looks dysfunctional, but for them it works wonderfully. That's why they can't break it off. In other words, it works for them.